Wes and Ted's Excellent Conversation, a podcast about teaching, learning, and anything else that pops into Wes and Ted's heads.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, as you just saw, gosh, super frustrated trying to set up all the tech for this thing.
I think, you know what? I will say you're allowed to have, we're all allowed to have a bad morning.
I appreciate
a bad day.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
So and you know you're good friends, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
You know you're good friends when you can have a bad day in front of somebody else.
Then you must be my good friend. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah. No, it's
Two
a
good
good
friends.
Thing. It's a good thing. I understand that you have some free products that you might want to share with some of our listeners. Is that true?
You know, I do, Wes, and longtime listeners to the show might notice this is maybe the first time we've actually properly done any marketing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. No, we've done a little bit. I mean, we've shared some URLs before.
I guess that's true.
That counts. And
sure.
I'm going to share another URL now, but So I teach SAT and ACT classes. That's my thing. That's my area of expertise. And I've got a free class that I would like to invite everyone to join. It's called the 5-minute version. And basically it's 5 minutes on each of the sections of the two college admissions tests, the two major ones. So the SAT and the ACT. Come check it out at tutorted.com. And you'll see a free pop-up, a pop-up for a free class, I should say, after exactly 10 seconds on the website. And Wes, I believe you have a course to share with us.
I do. I actually have a couple different things. At wescarroll.com, you can find some of this stuff, but I'll make it a little bit easier. If you go directly to wescarroll.com/puzzler, you will find another podcast that I did in the past and might resurrect here at some point, which is all about math problems that you can do without pencil and paper. And I've gotten a lot of listeners who've said that they enjoy doing it around the kitchen table with their kids. And that really warms my heart. It's a lovely thing there. And then for those folks who are a little bit more serious about math competitions, they can go to wescarroll.com/AMC and find some other things that they can do that will sort of turbocharge those efforts. But, it's all at wescarroll.com as everything else is at tutorted.com.
Yeah. And AMC stands for American Math Competition.
Oh, yeah. I probably should have mentioned that, huh? Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, I'm a big math nerd. In the same way that SAT and ACT, in general standardized tests is your bag. Mine is all about math competitions, which is another kind of standardized test. And like with you, there's some content you need to learn, and there's also some self-awareness and self-management skills that are really necessary to do well. And so that's the overlap between what you do and what I do, and it's a big overlap, I'd say. Yeah,
definitely. I've got a thought to share, and then a question for you. The thought, well, it's sort of a reflection. Back in the day, that same test was called the ASME. We've probably talked about this at some point.
AHSME, American High School Math Exam. Yeah.
And I scored like 95 points as a sophomore and 100 points as a junior. And, that meant you qualified for the next test.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. So that was my mom's reaction too. She was a math teacher, and I was like, and she was never surprised by my prowess. You know what I mean? Except for that one time. And I was like, what the heck? Well, that was absolutely sort of like, that was not an exceptional result for me. It was, it was exactly where I was supposed to be, okay. But that was the tops of my math skill. You know what I mean? I was not scoring 105 points. And when I got to the 6-question follow-up test, the AIME, I was lost. I may have had an answer to like one question, but it was really hard. So there's a cap to math intelligence. Oh, and sorry, let me just.
Okay.
Can I share one more? Yeah. I hope I haven't shared this anecdote. I may have, but it's still a good anecdote.
Okay.
Freshman year of college, I was in Math 104B.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is weird that I remember that exact appellation. But one of my roommates was in Math 103. Okay. Another one was in Math 201. So there were like 3 levels of math within my triple. Upstairs, Ben Summers was in Math 211, I think it was. his neighbor Gerald was in Math 217. So they were at 2 other levels. Oh, and
Okay,
another guy.
you remember the number of your freshman math class or whatever? Okay, that's something. But the fact that you remember your upstairs neighbor 1 room over, the number of, anyway, go on.
I just remembered the other kid too. There was another kid who was in Math 101.
Jeez.
And yeah, I know, it's weird.
That was the pecking order? Oh, my word. So speaking of pecking orders, and forgive me if this is disappointing, but the 6-question Amy that you mentioned, it's got 15 questions on it.
Oof.
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing, right? It's so hard. Like, and everybody does the same thing of like, look, I'm not looking at question 15. That's just crazy town, right? It's like, and they get nuts. Like, you look at some of those question 15s and you're like, okay, high schoolers are going to answer this in a timed context? Are you kidding me? Like, it's super cool, but
that's the kind of the moral of this story too. So Gerald was my friend who was in Math 217. Okay. I think it was okay. Sorry. Okay, this is crazy. I'm going to correct my numbers. Brett, my roommate, with whom I shared a bunk bed, he was in 217. So 211. Ben upstairs was in 217, and Gerald was in 234.
Be honest. This is for posterity. Yes. Okay, go on.
And I said to Gerald one time, I was like, wow, that's crazy. I was looking at his problem set. I was like, that's crazy. You're so brilliant. And by the way, he is an actuary now, so he's a professional mathematician.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he said, you should meet Yuli. So there was another math student who was like, head and shoulders above Gerald as a mathematician. I feel like I've shared that anecdote before, but
no, I don't think so.
Like I said, it's.
I was just at a wedding on the East Coast this weekend where I was standing up for my college buddy, and one of the other people in attendance was the woman who lived across the hall from me. Oh my gosh, who got me through some of the math classes. And it was just, it's so fun to feel, okay, like my whole profession is to be good at this. And yet I think back to some of the people who helped me, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I feel like such a moron next to these people. But it just goes to show you that, if you've got the right mindset, it's like, well, yeah, you're not trying to be on top. You're just trying to do better. Like that's the whole game right there. And, so as we've discussed before, so much of our sort of cultural programming that we had to undo to become successful students and successful teachers, right, is around, being the best. It's like, no, it's not about being the best. It's about doing the best you can in the moment. That's all you have. And just keep doing that, again and again. Anyway, I'm preaching to the choir.
No, that's a math lesson, but that's a life lesson.
Oh, of course.
I mean, that's, yeah. So I have a question for you. What is the... can you point to like the specifics? I don't doubt that they exist. Sure. I just want to know what they are. What are the specific benefits of working on kind of like puzzler problems? Like, what do you see? What do you think students get out of that?
Well, you know what? I think I'm going to answer that from my own point of view. Like I've seen a lot of this stuff, but I'm just going to tell you why I started doing it and why, what I got out of it. I think that the biggest thing is that to this day, when I look at a difficult problem, and I don't just mean math problem, I mean an anything problem, right? A business problem, an interpersonal problem, a whatever. Like I routinely have that moment of anxiety, right? Like I actually have a physical reaction to being confronted with something that I'm not sure I can solve. And the thing that I've gotten out of all these math competitions is I recognize that feeling, right? I observe it for what it is, and I have a playbook that I can pull from to try to grapple with it. I often joke that that tutoring and coaching done right looks a lot like therapy, and that's why, right? Like what I'm describing is a psychological benefit, but that there's just a huge crossover there. So. I just got done saying that some of the people, that I went to school with make me look like a moron, but I'm going to turn it around and say, because of the playbook, I can punch above my weight. Okay. And we've talked before about the difference between, how big is your mental engine and how good a driver are you? Well, however big my mental engine is, I'm a pretty good driver at this point. I've done a lot of driving, and I've gotten a lot of coaching on how to drive well. And as a result, again, I can punch above my weight. I can look at a problem and say, okay, there's a lot of me that says I have no business even confronting this problem. And yet I know deep in my bones, I'm going to crack this, and I'm going to crack it in short order. I don't yet know how, but it'll be fine. And boy, what a life skill.
we're going to get
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, and I've got thoughts. We will, I promise, listener, get to the topic. We always do, but this is so interesting. I'm thinking about musicians. I'm thinking about talent versus practice and like discipline and execution, right? And the only goal is execution. The only goal is to deliver the music.
Yeah.
And so how that comes out and how that sounds is ultimately the most important thing. But I think that for some reason, you and and a lot of other people too, but I think we focus on talent first. That there's this sort of like standard of like, starting point basically that helps you evaluate a person, that if you're of a certain, caliber, then you're worth a certain amount. Now, when it comes to music, talent is important, and talent basically tells you, one way of thinking of it is how many different things can you do at the same time? Can you basically stay in pitch, maintain rhythm, have feel, communicate, have dynamics, follow a conductor, be independent, all these different things. And a really good musician can do all of those things in sort of a masterful way. But you can also practice your way towards becoming that. And if you don't practice as a musician, you will not get to that level. I mean, unless you're just like, freakishly good. But even if you're freakishly good, practice helps. So I think that we ought to, up our mental take on the value of, diligence and craftsmanship that lead us to becoming the kind of math performers that we are. Like I hear you just in a very subtle way belittling the fact that you've actually learned how to become a problem solver. It's like, who cares? Who cares? Can you solve the problem? Amazing. That's the key. So anyway, that's a new revelation for me. And I think I know for a fact, actually, it's more adaptive to think that way.
Oh, goodness, yes.
Because if, because if you either have talent or you don't. But discipline, you can build, and you can have it today, and you can have it tomorrow. You can have it whenever you want to have it. So, and it can make you better.
Well, let me give you a mental model that you may disagree with, but I stand ready to defend it, I think. Although, we'll see. Here's the mental model. So everything that you're good at, you've learned to be good at. You're not born good at anything. Ask any baby. And what we think of as talent, I think, is a multiplier on your practice efforts. If you have talent in an area, what it means is that a given, an hour of dedication to this thing will give you what it would take someone else an hour and 10 minutes to learn, or whatever the value of the multiplier is. And I want to suggest that multiplier is actually not all that large. It's not you get in an hour what someone else takes 3. I really do think it's like an hour and 10 minutes. And the reason that such a small difference can make such a big difference over time is that if you happen to be slightly better at taking on knowledge in a particular area, then it will feel slightly easier for you. You'll get a little bit more praise. You'll get more dopamine, whatever. You'll be more inclined to do more of it. You'll be more inclined to get the coaching resources. I mean, we've seen this in a lot of books, and obviously in just regular life, the data bears this out. And so what tends to happen is there's this, not flywheel, but ratchet, right? A little success leads to a little more success, leads to a little more success. It's the accumulation of small wins that lead to the outsized results. Like, I have no doubt that Mozart was better, right, at learning musical things, but like, you start as early as he did with the resources that he had, surrounded by expert musicians as he was, with a great deal of focus, and it's not a surprise that, at age 6, you seem like a prodigy. It's like, well, he had an amount of practice at age 6 that's the equivalent of what I probably had at age, 25. I mean, maybe, or maybe I've never practiced as much as Mozart did by the time he was age, whatever it may be, right? And I would argue that there's something to be said for the value of understanding the mechanism, or the mechanisms by which someone can do in an hour what it takes someone else an hour 5 to do, so that you can, and that's sort of the metacognitive and the meta learning skills, right? You and I both have some inkling how to approach a new thing. Like, I am not I am not at all good at, golf or whatever, but I bet I could learn to be decent at golf faster than the average bear just because I know what the learning curve is supposed to look like. Like I know if I'm sitting in front of the ball with a coach or whatever, like I know why the coach is saying what the coach is saying. I know what it's supposed to feel like when I'm in the right place in the learning curve. Like all those little things, they add up, I would say.
I love the point of view. I love a strong point of view in general, and that's a fun one. I definitely disagree.
Awesome. Yes. Let's get into it, baby. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I had this professor in college. He was teaching a Shakespeare class, and we were talking about the fact that Shakespeare wrote his 4 great tragedies in like 5 years.
Okay.
So Hamlet, the Scottish play, King Lear, and what's the other one? Othello.
Okay.
And he was telling a story about how Faulkner wrote his 4 great books in 7 years. And one of his students said, and don't make me say what they are. Well, let's try.
Faulkner's? Oh, gosh.
Yeah. A Light in August, Absalom, The Sound of the Fury, and what's the funeral one?
I've heard of some of the ones you've named so far. Like I'm not your guy to help you with the 4th one. Oh, okay, great, sure.
Yeah. This is why this is the Jeopardy category I needed but didn't get. I know. It's fine. And then U.S. history pops up as the final Jeopardy category.
Of course.
Anyway, I'm not bitter.
Did you do it with Alex?
Give me a freaking sports. Yeah.
You did? Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I know. It is pretty sweet.
God.
Rest in peace, Alex.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What a giant. Anyway.
So this professor said, the student's comment was, Faulkner wrote those 4 books in 7 years. I mean, it would take me 10 years to write one of those books. And the point is, there is no punchline. That is the punchline, because the point is the student could never write that book. And the reason that student could never write that book is that they're not Faulkner. And what's the difference? What's the difference between this student who went to Princeton and is probably pretty smart and Faulkner? And the answer is talent, style. Even if you had Faulkner's style, even if you could imitate it, you still couldn't do Faulkner.
Well, now hang on a second. So there's, let's be a little more specific about the goal in this story, right? Is the goal, well, I mean, obviously if the goal is simply to copy Faulkner's work word for word, even I could do that.
Well, that's not the goal.
Obviously it's not.
It's to write a book as good as Faulkner, yeah.
Sure, and it's not to write a book as good as Faulkner's book in the time that Faulkner wrote his book. It's to write it today, right?
Sure.
It's a subjective, well, all right, let's just assume that
Kinda.
Yeah, all right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not completely subjective. Like
somewhat.
He's a good writer, objectively. Okay, fair enough.
And good might be an understatement, but yes, carry on.
Okay, yeah, I didn't mean to undercut Faulkner's excellence. So is there something to be said for the idea that what Faulkner had to say resonated with his age in a way that if you want to do the same thing today, there has to be an element of luck because you may or may not happen to be the person in the context with even a chance of pulling that out of yourself? I mean, I genuinely don't know, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good question. I like the nature of the disagreement. It's like tickling me, even though I'm sure I'm right. No, I'm just messing with you.
Well, no, I mean,
I have to be right.
Like you say, strong point of view. I prefer for you to know that you're right? And I would like to continue to debate this, particularly because I don't think it's going to end with one of us convincing the other. I think it's going to end with us looking more carefully at, okay, what is talent? How does this whole thing work? Because we spend a lot of time thinking about that, right? We have seen literally thousands of students individually, as to say nothing of between us. And we have a pretty good mental database, each of us, I think, of, so many students that it might count as data instead of anecdotes on some level, right? We've seen a broad range. And we have our own mental frameworks that have been challenged over the years by these various students. And and both of us are in the business of moving the needle. Like both of us are in the business.
Exactly.
Of,
And this is important. The needle can be moved.
Right.
That's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's clear that we can agree that, okay, whatever, whether talent is immutable or not or whatever, like the end result of being able to write, the end result of reaching a goal, okay, I may not be able to turn you into Faulkner, but I can get you closer is kind of that's the punchline, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is like just the world's most random example coming out of that. But we play beanbag toss, aka cornhole, at my parents' cabin.
Yeah.
And I was never. I have like okay fine motor skills. They're not like probably 50th percentile.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like right in the middle. Not exceptional, but not terrible either.
Okay.
My nephew Van, he's got really high level fine motor skills, and his dad does too, and his mom does too, my sister.
Yep.
And so we'll play the game, and as a 12-year-old, he's landing shots and kind of playing in a way that's like pretty darn good for that age. I've gotten good at it too, but like he has a natural instinct for it. We've played ping pong, and more quickly than I ever did, he's hitting it with spin. Like he understands, his brain gets the physics of that and basically says like, oh yeah, if I hit it this way, I'm going to get this different spin, and that might be useful. You know what? So, it's just, yeah.
I hear you. And it's interesting because I'm confident that story supports each of our individual conflicting arguments, right? Like I get that from your point of view, that makes your argument look right. And from my point of view, it's software, not hardware. And I would say, and this is sort of article of faith, right? So, whatever. But I would say that the reason that it looks like talent in his case and that you can't acquire it is that you and I, and possibly no one, knows what he's really doing such that we could teach it to another person. Like the whole point of these standardized tests, at least at one point, if not currently, was to measure something that was innate. I mean, we've talked about this before. Back when, in their history, the SAT was an aptitude test at its core, right? That was its goal anyway. Maybe no longer, and it was trying to measure something that couldn't be changed. And, an industry appeared around it that demonstrated it could be changed. And the test has evolved, I think, in part in response.
And it's funny that aptitude is a dirty word now. I never hear anyone talk about it. Anyone who's credible talk about aptitude.
Well, I mean, as I've said before, there's a degree to which bright is bright, but it's not.
That's tough. Well, but that's funny because that bright is kind of the opposite of what you're saying right now, right?
It is.
Bright is hardware, not software.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there are, people are driving, to use the analogy, right? There are a lot of drivers out there, and they're not all driving the same car, right? There are bigger and smaller engines, right? But the reason I think that aptitude has become something of a dirty word is not to make the factual claim that differences there don't exist, but rather to shine a spotlight on the fact that focusing on differences does no one any good. Focusing on the parts that are mutable is the only way we're going to generate people who are on the streets doing better work driving, right? Like, like even if it's 90% hardware and 10% software, focus on improving the software because that's the part you have access to. Now, I've said before, you actually can change the hardware to some degree, but I'm not going to sit here and say that hardware is completely mutable. I mean, that's why the word talent exists in the first place. And to that degree, I agree with you for sure. But to say, you're fixed in time, of course, that's not true. It's just a question of how much is mutable. And oh gosh, I'm thinking of my good friend. I'll name drop Mike Mendyke, a former bandmate of mine. Interesting guy, and he's the first guy I like identified in him after knowing him pretty closely for a long time, that he's simply good at getting good at stuff. Like he's not like
that's a great skill.
Yeah, I mean, he does not present as inherently talented at particular stuff. It's just that when he jumps into a thing, he gets good at it faster. And it's just like the first few times I saw him do it, it was just like, that's a spooky power. But as I observed more and more, it's like, oh, there's something there. And I think that's a big part of why I adopted this mindset that like, oh no, there's, what's going on in there is more mutable than we give it credit for, because I really don't think that it's an inborn talent that he has. I think it's something he's acquired. And again, article of faith, like, I know.
So his ability to get better at things, that's something that he's developed over time too.
He's a real smart guy.
Exactly. No, that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying, right? It's like, if he's a really smart guy, isn't that the talent? We're gonna keep going down the rabbit hole on this one. Let's which and it's an interesting topic, but I'm not sure we're moving forward, just exploring, circling around the drain hole.
The purported topic of today, right, is about learning. Imagine that we're doing an education podcast, or at least purportedly talking about.
I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I want to kick it off just because it's such a specific. My reference point for this is so specific, and I'm actually really glad to exercise this particular note from our sort of like podcast planning sheet.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
We have this shared Google Doc, and there's been this comment that's been living on it ever since the beginning, and I didn't type it.
You didn't?
And I definitely did not type it. No.
Really?
There's no.
I was totally sure that you had.
That's funny.
Oh my God, that's even better.
How did it get in there?
I don't know.
That's funny because it doesn't make any GD sense to me. I mean, now it does, but
now I love it even more. Go on.
There's this comment on there, and it's been on there since the beginning, and it says, awesome. Plato scratched things in the dirt. Gosh, that's interesting. Maybe I did type it, but I didn't say it, but maybe I typed it. It doesn't make it for a long time. It didn't make a lick of sense to me, and it was, or really, the problem was, it didn't strike me as the genesis of an episode. It was like, okay, and so anyway, I'm really, really glad to be moving on beyond it. At some point, the spreadsheet will scroll up, and I won't be able to see it anymore. And I'm really looking forward to that day. It's not going to be today. It won't be for probably another 5 or 6 episodes, and I'm going to have to live with that.
Depending on your screen settings.
That's true. Right. Exactly. I might make a really, really, really narrow window. So yeah, but we're getting there. We're kind of passing the tipping point here. But maybe you could start. Maybe you could explain what the quote.
Well, there's
things in the dirt means.
Like I've never really I always have to look at the next cell over and read what I'm going to read aloud here. The teacher of all teachers worked in person and by scratching things in the dirt with a stick. No one could argue that this approach didn't work. What's different now? What do we need to retain from that model? Like to me, it's like, it's just like pull it back to the beginning. Where's the beginning? But Plato's a pretty good choice. And we've said many times before that teaching one-on-one, that's just an enormous advantage if you're trying to help someone improve at something. Oh, could we? Would it be fair to distinguish between the business of trying to fill someone with knowledge, help someone acquire skills, and maybe that's the distinction. I'm trying to sort of parse out sort of teaching versus tutoring versus coaching, but maybe that's going even too far down that particular rabbit hole.
Well, talking about coaching would be interesting. I just had someone ask me yesterday, do you know about coaching? And it's like, not formally, kinda. I know what coaching. I know what that word means, but for a long time as a marketer of tutoring, I've been trying to sort of put a name, put a label to the things that we do. You know what I mean? What the kind of contributing factors are.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, and if it were purely a knowledge acquisition game, I don't think that we would have sort of lifetime businesses doing this.
Right. No, I think you're right.
There's more than just knowledge to it, but is it just knowledge and skill acquisition? Is that, does that cover everything?
Well, I heard an analogy the other day that worked for me. I'll share it with you and we'll see if it lands for you. I was mentioning golf before. Let's say I'm trying to learn golf. Okay. And, I'm no good at it, never done it, whatever. So it seems to me one of the things I could do, is I could watch a bunch of YouTube videos. And to me, that analogizes to teaching. Like, there's a lot of good content on YouTube. I mean, no one's going to argue otherwise. And if I see something that's not going to help me, I can figure it out pretty fast and move to another one and so on. So I think I could probably, I don't want to say that I could become a great golfer by watching YouTube, but I could learn enough stuff from watching YouTube that I could then go out and pick up a golf club and have a better outcome than if I hadn't watched the videos. Okay. And I would say that tutoring then is doing the same thing, except doing it with your buddy sitting next to you, and your buddy already knows how to play. Like, your buddy's already pretty good.
Right.
So then your buddy is telling you, like, oh, this one's no good, or pay attention to this piece, or, sort of highlight. So there's this sort of expert eye view on what you're doing. And in effect, it supercharges your ability to get value out of the content that you're consuming.
Supercharges. That's nice.
Right.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
And then I would frame coaching as, right, that's probably, I'm standing there holding a club and there's someone watching me do it. And they're saying, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to straighten out your left elbow, which sounds like it's coming out of the blue for me. It's like, what do you mean straighten my left? He's like, okay, hold it like this. Now try it. And I'm like, well, that's super awkward. And he's like, well, yeah, but you just hit it 30 more yards and straighter. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, the coaching, the tutoring is about, it's augmenting the knowledge and skill acquisition process. And coaching is about just having an experience base where you can watch someone in the middle of that process and identify quickly, this is the bottleneck, and here is a method for resolving that bottleneck.
Yeah, God, that's interesting. I have I have a kind of comparable model to that. That I actually wrote this down a few minutes ago, thinking this might actually be the topic for an entire episode, and maybe it will be.
Pardon me.
That's right. The difference between coaching, again, I guess, is that called coaching, and therapy.
Oh,
so
yeah, this would be good.
Actually, so it's called life coaching. Most therapists don't give advice, and when they're trained, at sort of these reputable schools, they do a lot of things besides give advice. They listen carefully, they share positive regard, and they just observe and they ask questions, and then it's the journey's happening on the client side. A life coach would say, hey, did you send out those resumes this week? Or did you consider, going back to school to get this other degree? So I've never been in life coaching, so I'm making this up.
Okay.
But it's a little bit more specific and directive. Whereas therapy is a little bit more, it's like not quite totally self-guided. But there is some like the individual leads, and needs to. And I wonder if is that some of the difference there? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what do you think tutors are like therapists?
Well, I definitely think good tutors are like therapists, but to engage with your example, so I have a therapist and I have a coach. He doesn't call himself a life coach, so more of a business coach. Man, he's a coach. And that distinction doesn't describe the difference between what I get from the two of them for me.
Okay.
I feel like part of how I pick the therapist that I'm working with is that she's willing to dispense advice. I picked someone who's in a good position to give advice, right? And while that may not be her go-to thing, she'll, like I routinely ask, and she will provide some advice and so on. And indeed, the same is true of my coach in the sense that like his notion is, okay, I'm gonna hold space and I'm gonna hold you accountable and all this kind of good stuff. But he's also a really bright guy, lots of experience and relevant experience indeed, and he's thought deeply about it. And so oftentimes, I guess what I'll say is what they have in common, right, is that I'll say some stuff and then I'll just listen very carefully to how they react and what they say in response. Because what I'm really doing is I'm putting them in my situation, finding out how they would respond to that situation and observing the difference between their reactions and mine, or their responses and mine, right? Hoping that I'll gain something good out of that. And I mean, that's happened over and over. And so like a big difference there is that, what I'll talk to a therapist about, the sort of the region of my life, right, versus what I'll talk to a coach about are different. It's not that I'm, it's not that I wouldn't talk about blah, blah, blah to blah, it's not segregated in that way. It's just that I'm trying to play to their individual expertises, right? And
do you look for someone who is specifically a good model for you? You know what I mean? Like,
Of course.
as you get started. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Like, what are the characteristics that you'd say, these are the things that I need to see in that person before I start working with them?
Well, there's there's some obvious stuff, like I just need to feel like I have good rapport with them. But a big part is they need to be thinky. Like I reflect a lot, which can be a strength and a weakness, obviously. But like I'm best working with someone who has not only experienced something at least somewhat analogous to whatever it is that I'm grappling with, but who has then spent some time sort of thinking about it. Because when you talk to me, part of what you're getting is not just the person I am in this moment, but the product of all the reflecting I've done. And I don't like, God, that probably didn't come out the way I wanted to come out. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I tend towards is neuroticism the trait? I don't want to suggest that I'm neurotic. I'm not even sure I know the sort of technical definition there, but like, that business of,
I think I know.
Yeah, exactly. I tend towards being sort of an anxious person, temperamentally, right? And while I'm not, I don't go through life sort of, being a nervous person per se, right? There's clearly some mechanisms inside me that sort of just reflexively do that if I'm not checking them. And as a result, like, when stuff happens, I tend to, there's a little bit of a hall of mirrors inside myself where I'm trying to look at it from every angle.
Yeah, that by the way, that is the definition of neuroticism.
Oh.
What was that? There's a self-help book, The Road Less Traveled, I think. And basically the neurotic person, according to the author, blames what's wrong with the world on themselves. Looks around and is basically saying, like, what am I doing to cause this situation to exist? Whereas the narcissist is, what is everybody else around me doing to cause this world to be the way it is? And the sort of initial point is that the neurotic, that neither one of them is necessarily right, but the neurotic is easier to help because they have they
feel
the
they have
ability
agency.
to change anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that doesn't. So I don't think that term then is the one that I wanted to, because it's not about the the causation or anything of that sort. It's just that I'm constantly on the lookout for causation. It's not that I tend towards blaming other people, blaming myself, whatever. It's just that I'm trying to answer that question constantly, even though I'm generally thwarted, right?
I would say you tend to blame yourself, though. I mean,
Oh,
I don't
really?
know. I mean, yeah. And see yourself as having agency, which is I don't know. I mean, that strikes me as an intelligent quality. I don't know. I like that quality.
But see, here's the thing, right?
For what it's worth.
Here we're talking about tutoring and coaching, and that's a topic that feels to me like sort of a therapy thing, right? Like I'm glad you made the comment. I'm glad that we're talking about it. And the reason that it seems super germane to me is that you can't silo these things completely. Like, if you're talking about the trouble you're having preparing for the ACT, if you're talking about the trouble you're having in algebra class, like, there is a degree to which you're talking about a thing that happened to you in 5th grade. I mean, like, I don't mean to be overblown about it, but like, it really is all connected. Now, an important caveat here is that it's not our explicit role to go, talking about one's family dynamics when we're trying to teach them a particular skill, nor would we ever, that's not our thing, obviously. And so an important difference between therapist, tutor, coach, right, is the explicit role. Like, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds, right? And of course, it's those walls are much less permeable for us because, we routinely work with minors, right? Like, it's not okay for, like, there's, you can't, like, you're going to stay in your lane and you're going to talk about what you're going to talk about. But you still have some sense of intuition about where a student is bumping up against something that's difficult for them that hasn't been difficult for many other students that appear to fall into a category that they share, and again, right, you do this long enough and you have a playbook, you have a set of tools that you can try to apply, and you have an intuition that, maybe if we came at it from this angle, right, we'd have success where other people haven't. Anyway.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I would say I do reach sometimes, and I don't specifically, I never have as my mission, I want to change this family's dynamics.
It's so far out of bounds. Yeah, no, totally.
Well, I know, but it's funny because I think I do it anyway sometimes.
Well, sure, but I mean that's the difference. That's the difference between a therapist who's hired to do it and a friend who's there to help who does some good. Like there's a world of difference
Right.
between those two, even if the effect, winds up being the same.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I've never been hired specifically to do that,
of course
but I've
not.
done it anyway.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. I'm hemming and hawing here because I'm hoping and trusting that the listener, gets that we not trying to be bulls in a china shop here, and that we work very hard to be sensitive to, again, not crossing lines that we ought not cross. And at the same time, we are hired to help these people. And if the thing that's getting in their way, is sort of psychological in nature, then, it's certainly our mission to find sort of tutor appropriate ways to help them however we need to. Yeah.
Well, that was my recent experience. My recent example on this was I had a student whose family's belief system was that she wasn't good at math. And
the family's, not just the student, but the family's belief system.
Correct.
Ooh, that is a tough one. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I had to, I really need to subtract that belief from the student right now.
Right.
That's step one, because
Right.
It just absolutely limits our ability to improve. Gosh, I wish. It's so funny. I've told this story a couple times. I can't remember if I've told it on this podcast or not. But the parent at some point, the kid went from. The kid improved by 5 points on the ACT math,
which is that's a categorical change. That's not the student got better. That's the student now looks like a different person to someone reading the scores.
Yes.
Yeah.
And exactly. And if you know stats, you can say, oh yeah, that's an improvement that is, double the margin of error, and therefore it means it's different.
Yeah.
And despite that improvement, the parent said, the math is what it is. Aptitude is aptitude.
Oh, you have mentioned that before, but now you're giving us more context. Yeah, no, that's.
Did I mention that? Yeah,
you did.
Yeah.
But now with this additional context, it's like, that's a place where, and I think you mentioned that you wanted to pull the parent aside and have a conversation later about it. And I think that's not only in bounds, that's your responsibility at that point, right? And you don't need to get inside the parent's psyche, but you can spell out for the parent. It's like, look. Here's the belief system that I'm perceiving in this context. Here is the effect that it's having.
Right.
Here's a different choice that you could make, and here's the effect it will have if you choose it. Yeah. And
this is drawing us back to the actual topic, which is what I was trying to do in that one situation. And this is don't be scared. I'm not trying to do this with in almost every tutoring situation of all time. But I was trying to help create some systemic change within this family.
Yeah.
Because in order for the kid to improve and believe that she can improve, she needed to have live in a different sort of belief system.
Yeah.
So that's a very high level, very specific goal that is not under the umbrella of content knowledge or approach to a math problem. You know what I mean? This is emotional and psychological, something totally, totally different. So,
and thankfully, the time-honored principle, fake it till you make it, applies here, right? It's not that the parents need to believe something different. It's that they need to pretend for a month that they believe something different. And if after believing it for a month, and looking at the data of what it does to their kid causes them to change some future behaviors, hey, that's great too, right?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting. I like that. That comes back to the coaching, tutoring, therapy distinction I was pointing to.
Yeah.
Do you want them to actually believe it, and do you want them to actually believe it now? Do you want to convince them?
But you said yourself, right? All that matters is the outcome, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a funny one though. I mean, this is really weird. I don't know if I actually feel that way. I think I believe that the process is a good process will lead to a better outcome. I believe that when you run the process in the correct way, the outcome will be a better one, and we'll see what it is. But I don't think you should ever originate from you can have the end goal, but I don't think you should be thinking about the end goal as you do the work. Because I think what you're doing is you're adapting how you work and how you think in productive and thoughtful and organized ways that are maximally efficient for the goal you're trying to achieve. You know what I mean? But you don't fixate on the goal. You fixate on the methods of getting there, and then you will get there.
That's something my colleague and good friend and former business partner, Justin Seigers, was very wise to recognize very early on in our partnership. We did an SAT prep company many years ago. He's still working there.
It's called BODSAT.
BODSAT, yeah, BODSAT, BODSAT.com. Name originally came from Bodhisattva, those who learn but do not pass on to the next plane, but rather stay behind to help others was the idea. Yeah, we're in Northern California, man, so we're allowed to do stuff like that. Anyway, he really pointed out that if you're focused on the goal, you're going to be thinking about how you're doing relative to the goal, and it's just not maximally productive, or in some cases it's not productive at all. It's like your goal is to focus on what you are doing right now and how you could get better at it. Because if you are constantly doing better in the moment, you will have a hard time avoiding reaching your goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And it's kind of it feels like magic in a way.
Yeah.
And also it's, in some cases you're developing skills that are test specific.
Sure.
That are and I'll tell kids that, I'll basically say, hey, I want you to learn this thing. I want you to do it this way. As of 1 p.m. on Saturday of the day that you take the test, I want you to forget you ever learned it, because it's not going to serve you in life. But here's some other things that will serve you.
Yeah.
Here are some gifts for a lifetime that you can take away from this.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about, if I may plug it again, your 5-minute course, of which there's a longer version, of course, is, some of the things that you need for these tests are very test specific. And, from your, dare I say, lofty perspective, right? You can just sort of list those off on, the fingers of your left hand pretty easily. And so, someone can spend 5 minutes and be like, oh, that's the game we're playing here. Oh, that's the way this works. And it's, super helpful.
Yeah, that's funny. That's an interesting way of thinking of it, because it's there are different lenses through which to see tests or academic challenges.
Sure.
And the point of the 5-minute version courses is to provide the 3 most useful, about 3 per subject, lenses,
Oh, I see, yeah.
It's basically think of these questions this way.
Yep.
Think of these questions this way. And then you can go deeper after that, right? It's it only takes 5 minutes to learn that stuff, and that's fantastic. And it's, the benefit of that is kind of greater on the whole than, the benefit of any one individual lesson after that, right? It's
Sure.
Oh yeah, then I can teach you about commas. I will teach you about commas. It'll only help you on the comma questions, but and actually that's actually one of the 3 lessons. So something like
you need to get more narrow.
Semicolons.
Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or possessive apostrophes or whatever.
Sure.
It's one, you're going to get benefit out of that too. But it's basically the point of those classes is to show you that I'm thinking about optimal ways to look at these tests, efficient ways, but ways that hopefully are, recognizable and thoughtful and that allow you to understand too the nature of the test, right? I shared an example in this podcast about sort of a math memorization technique where it was basically, I had this one kid who could not do ratios, and I told him, okay, whenever you see a ratio question, you do this, this, and this, and you don't ask any questions, you just do it.
Yeah, all right.
And it just never worked. It just never landed. It just never played. And I think it was because he didn't understand the why.
Okay.
And there could have been questions where it lined up just exactly the way that it needed to line up.
Yeah.
But if you understand the reason behind, you can start to kind of mildly shape your strategic approach.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's not sort of like a single-minded, robotic approach.
It's funny. I'll throw something out there. It occurs to me that I wonder if we do things opposite from each other here. To paint with a broad brush, the higher up the score ladder a student is, the more the broader my advice tends to be. I mean, there are specifics, at every score, for every, from 18 to 21, from 21 to 24, there are specific things that go in there. But I feel like when I'm working with a student who's sort of closer to the average score, then it's sort of, it tends to be more tactical. And as they climb the score ladder, it becomes more about the why. It becomes more about the what's really going on here. Because, and I think that's because in sort of the middle of the score range, anything I say, right, if I'm going to talk about commas, it's going to show up, right, on multiple questions on every single test that the student takes, right? There's going to be a lot of value there. Whereas if you're trying to get from a 34 to a 36, like, I'm not going to be able to give you the encyclopedia of every possible thing that you might encounter for that one last question that you would otherwise have trouble answering. But I can give you sort of broad strokes. Here's the reason behind it. Here's the way the test is constructed. Here's the kinds of stuff that tends to happen, so that you can make good judgments, not only on the test, but as you're practicing. When you hit something novel, you have a framework for sort of, gleaning some wisdom from that sort of oddball question that you can then deploy later. So let me kick it back to you. Does that ring true for you? Is it backwards from your perspective?
Yes, it's totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there are aspects that I agree with, and I think that there can be tendencies within score groups, and you might teach the kid who gets. I think you generally will teach the student who starts with a 21 differently than the way you teach a student who gets a 34, on the way in. And we're talking about a test that's out of 36.
Right.
That's the difference between the 50th percentile and the 99.4 fourth percentile.
Yeah.
So that said, there are lots of different ways to earn a low score and a high score, and there are lots of different ways to go from a 34 to a 36. So,
all right.
It could be.
I should acknowledge at this point that while I have some experience doing this, you have a lot more experience doing this, and you have an experience doing it across a broader range of starting scores. So I'm
and this is the only thing that I do, basically.
Whereas it's one of the things that I do. And so, yeah, it makes perfect sense that I'd be the journeyman here and you'd be the expert.
Well, the thing I would say is that for a student who's trying to get from a 34 to a 36, often the thing we're working on is accuracy. Is basically just, how do you know you got the question right? That's the important thing.
I like that. Yeah. I find accuracy comes up a lot in those contexts, but I tend to take sort of a more, it's totally funny because I'm trained as an engineer, and yet I take a more nutty crunchy approach to it, of really trying to break down, okay, what's going on here? But I really do like that idea of just focusing right at the outset of, like, how can you know? Because that's a piece of being accurate, is determining whether more effort here in this question is called for or not. I like that a lot. Yeah,
and that's a skill. Well, that's the metacognition thing.
Yeah.
That's the being aware of your own thinking.
Right.
That I'm a big believer in it and the value of it. I kind of want to cultivate it. I do want to cultivate it in all my students. I think the higher level students are readier for it and do it more often. And there probably is a correlation between the fact that they do it and that they're doing a good job on the tests out of the gates.
Yeah. Well, that much we certainly have in common. That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. And that's part of why I say, as you do, right, that there are some parts of this work that translate to the rest of your life. It's partly because if you're more aware of your own thinking, not in an anxious or neurotic way, but if it's a tool in your toolkit that you can examine your own process internally, that's the person I'm going to bet on to be more capable in general.
No doubt. I want to make sure that we've exhausted this Plato thing, so I can put it behind me.
Oh, yeah, no. We should definitely jump in there.
I have an emotional need here to get rid of this thing.
Let us address that.
No, I mean, maybe this is the issue. Maybe this is my problem with Plato scratch things in the dirt, is that it's, that sentence doesn't describe what he scratched in the dirt. You know what I mean? So,
well, okay. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Well, let me see. Yeah. So, Pythagoras was, scratching triangles also. I think I remember that being in sand. It just depends on the soil structure and, wherever you're teaching. It really doesn't matter if it's a smart board or a chalkboard or a dry erase board, whatever it is, and it kind of, in a way, doesn't really matter what the information is, but how you communicate it and the purpose of communicating it. But Pythagoras was Well, it's interesting. Pythagoras is not known as a teacher. Pythagoras is known as a theorist, which is a big difference.
For sure.
The theorist is the person who comes up with the idea that's useful, not necessarily the person who teaches it. So yeah, Pythagoras was just drawing triangles most likely.
Yeah.
But what was Plato scratching?
So I think the reason that this shows up on our spreadsheet in the first place is that, gosh, there's a lot of money and attention being put into how teaching is done well. And yet we have some pretty clear evidence that 2,000 years ago, they had a pretty good idea how it worked, right? And to me, this is really about taking attention off the new shiny bell and whistle that allows a classroom teacher to blah, 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 and gets right back to basics, which is that teaching is not, in some sense, rocket science, right? It is pretty straightforward. And yet, well, it's not rocket science to us in the same way that teaching 30 people at once is straightforward to an experienced classroom teacher. And it's something that, I don't have that skill, right?
Right. That's interesting.
And it's just come back to basics, right? Like, bottom line, like, and I don't mean to say that what we do is easy, or that what a classroom teacher does is easy, or that parenting is easy. I'm not saying any of those things. I'm saying that they're all learnable, right? You can become good in those particular contexts, and it's not magic. And what the heck? There are a lot of tools that have helped all those different teachers become better that Plato didn't have access to, right? He didn't have an iPhone telling him when to show up for a student lesson like we do. But I guess there's another piece of it too, which is, and we talked about this the other day, is that Plato presumably spent hours thinking deeply about stuff, whereas you and I are embedded in environments where it's much more difficult to think deeply about stuff. I haven't read any of Faulkner's works, but I know how to change the settings on your iPhone. It's like, well, I mean, that's a choice, right? Like, maybe I'd be better off, if I didn't have so many different. Anyway, perhaps that's been.
Well, no, that's there's a lot there. I mean, I think the differentiation that you made between rocket science and did you say common sense, or what was it?
I don't remember. What I said.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the difference there is actually between something that is specific and arcane and technical, and something that's humane. Because I think that's the characteristic. For me, that's the characteristic of good teaching,
right,
that is essential.
And now we were talking about teaching and tutoring and coaching and therapy and blah, 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 blah. And all that sort of pales in comparison to the distinction you're raising here.
And I think when that stuff's done well, it's because it's humane. It's because the person is seeing you as, and understanding you as a human, and then relating to you at that level. That component is essential. And I think that, Plato clearly was thinking deeply, but I think he was also relating information in a way that was cogent and accessible to the fellow human, that to me is the advantage of tutoring, is meeting the person as a person, and helping them in that context.
And you're going to be hard pressed to write an app that empowers people to do that outside their own. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, and we have both tried. We both are trying. Actually, it's funny that we're near the end of the podcast here anyway. So, but but what's funny about that is that this will tell a story that will get me into the little tiny bit of promotion that I want to do anyway.
Okay.
I had this online class, right? And I still have an online class, but the structure of it has changed.
Okay.
So initially it was all of my curricula in video lessons. And I was pretty excited about it because it was me, it's me on camera teaching this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think I thought that was sort of humane, but the presentation of it was not humane at all. It was basically the equivalent of a book, just a stack of chapters with very little instruction or guidance in terms of how to use it, right? So you kind of flip through it, and maybe you'd see something and say, "Oh yeah, that's a topic I don't know all that well. I should investigate. I should, I should learn about that." And some students probably did that, and other students just saw this long list and they were like, "I don't know what to do with this," and didn't do anything. So then I added in some more structure, which was tiny bit of humanity, which is putting it on a 4-week calendar. Basically say, hey, you got 4 weeks. Here's what you do week 1. So that's beneficial. But here's the thing I did after that that makes it more humane is I added in 2 hours of classroom time with me each week, which adds in some accountability, which is a total human impulse, right? Just basically, I'm not going to do this, but if someone else expects me to do it, then I will. And some empathy and compassion and reflection. And the only difference in those courses is the amount of humanity that you get, the amount of attention paid to you as an individual that I think makes you better at getting the work done. You know, the content is the same. You know, I've added a little bit of content. It's presentation that has changed. By the way, those are SAT and ACT Bootcamp and SAT and ACT Bootcamp Pro, all on the web, tutorted.com. But yeah, that's the secret sauce.
But and that's
make it more humane.
That's an important distinction. I mean, that's an important part of what makes a tutor or a coach different from, let's say, well, no, I don't want to say different from a teacher, because there are some there are teachers whose sort of core humanity is their superpower. So, and that's pretty common actually. But I'll just say then that the notion that you changed the effectiveness of these courses so much without changing their so-called content really speaks to the core truth that we're trying to get at here, which is that, the thing that you're trying to learn is just a piece of the whole thing. Like, what makes you a great tutor isn't that you know more ACT arcana than the next guy, right?
No doubt. That's not it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's like, you know your stuff cold, but there's so much more to it than that, because you're a human trying to help another human, do better in a particular context. That makes perfect sense to me.
And I'm so sure that and I'd be curious to hear how if you want to take a shot at explaining a little bit of how you do that too. It's like you're not teaching a rote approach to problems.
No. So the Puzzler podcast, wescarroll.com/puzzler, right? That's all about just giving parents and kids an excuse to talk through some hard problems. And like the original, a piece of what I was thinking when I first started doing that was, I want to have like a prepackaged excuse for kids to see their parents sweat. Because it's just like, it's so powerful, right? To see your parent not know the answer to this thing and to realize, oh, the struggle I've been having, that's not because I'm doing it wrong. Like, that's part of the process, is struggling. And to see a parent sort of struggling with it gracefully and having some fun with it, I think some kids find that to be like kind of blows their mind of like, wait a minute, is that how I'm supposed to be doing this? And it's like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to be doing it, right? And then obviously in some of the solutions that I publish, I'm trying to sort of, give people the sense that like, there's not just one way to do these things, right? There's multiple ways. And then with the, it's totally funny to hear you talk about this course, because I had a very closely analogous course for the Math 2 subject test, which is no more. And like you, I iterated it through several different cycles, and each time sort of made it more humane, made it more approachable, made it more structured, made it, all those things. And then they pulled the test on me. But I'm using.
I've had that experience. If it makes you feel any better.
It does. I appreciate that. The funny thing is that my current AMC course, American Math Competition Prep course, is like super, super narrow. It's all about. It's totally funny. Right? In order to do well on this exam, much like the ACT, there are certain things you need to know. It's just that on the AMC, the number of things you need to know is to be fair larger. And so this time around, I've partnered up with the folks at achievable.me, and now I have a course that's all about, look, here's the content acquisition part. I'm not even trying to make it particularly humane. I'm just trying to make it as easy and smooth as possible for someone to get that stuff. And then I will handle all the humane parts, right? Like I'm happy to coach someone through all that stuff. It's just like, look, you got to know all this stuff. I'm making it as easy as I possibly can, because there's some memorization involved. And it turns out technology is good at helping you memorize. And so the different things need different applications.
But what's ironic about that is that when you point to that and say, here's the content learning part, That's humane. That's humane to say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because then they see it and they're like, oh, I understand. This is the part that's going to be sort of laborious and,
Right.
and time consuming and taxing, but I'm just going to get through it because then we'll get to the fun stuff soon.
Yeah, exactly. And I've stripped it down as much as it can be stripped down. Like, this would take a very long time any other way, but this way, it's gamified. It's sort of chunked out in a way that it doesn't ever feel like it. I mean, it's as much of a chore as brushing your teeth, right? It's just like, we're just going to routinize doing these certain things, and it's going to handle all the details, that kind of thing.
That's so great. I love that. I just love the fact that even sharing, like having the metaphor of this, it's like brushing your teeth. That's humane. That makes it easier to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we do this stuff without realizing we're doing it. I don't mean to like be. I'm speaking about all educators who are professional and thoughtful when I say that.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. It's funny. I'm really sticking to this humane thing. That like that's the key. That's the secret to being a good educator is just meeting someone as a person, regardless of what you're teaching.
Could not agree more. If you would like to have a humane discussion with the human with whom I'm talking, you should go to tutorshead.com, where you will be given instructions for an easy access point to talk with Ted.
If you would like to learn how to solve math problems, but become a better human being in the process, go to wescarroll.com. That's 2 R's and 2 L's in Carroll. I've been doing, this is our 11th episode of this podcast thus far, and I couldn't be happier to be doing it. I couldn't be happier to be having a conversation with this guy. So let that speak volumes for I don't know, what I think of him. I hope you agree with me.
Oh, I like my job a lot, but I'd rather keep doing this than get back to it.
Oh boy, I agree with that. I have a light week this week, so yeah.
Oh, that's good.
We'll get back to it soon now, I'm sure.
That sounds good. Yeah. And it's great to talk to you as always, Ted. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wes.
Thanks for hanging with us. Click subscribe, ring the bell, tell a friend, leave a comment. You know the drill.